The blistering Atlanta summer was in full swing, and the city seemed to sizzle under the oppressive heat. In one of its oldest neighborhoods, a place of stark contrasts, grand historic homes shared the streets with rows of graffiti-covered buildings and cracked sidewalks. It was a neighborhood full of life, laughter, and resilience, but also one weighed down by a history of systemic neglect and over-policing. For some, the season brought joy. Barbecues, kids playing in the streets, music spilling from front porches. For others, it brought an unshakable sense of unease. The familiar blue and white squad cars cruising slowly down their blocks weren't a symbol of safety. They were a warning. Rick Callahan, a veteran sergeant of the Atlanta Police Department, saw this part of town as his personal battleground. At 45 years old, Callahan carried himself with a mix of military precision and barely restrained hostility. His close-cropped gray hair and perpetually furrowed brow gave him the appearance of a man who had seen too much, or at least believed he had. Callahan's reputation preceded him. To his colleagues, he was a relentless enforcer, someone who got things done. To the black residents he policed, he was something else entirely, a man who seemed to take pride in finding reasons to stop them, question them, and, more often than not, humiliate them. Raised in a small, predominantly white town, Callahan carried the kind of biases he never questioned, the kind he wore like armor, justifying his actions with cliches about bad neighborhoods and protecting good people. On the other side of the city, 10-year-old Amelia Taylor walked with a spring in her step, her head full of ideas. Amelia was no ordinary child. She was sharp, inquisitive, and endlessly curious. A child who devoured books on science and mysteries. Her caramel-brown skin glowed in the sunlight, her neatly braided hair tied with bright beads that clicked softly as she moved. Amelia was the pride and joy of her parents. Her father, Marcus Taylor, was a man of great stature, not just in height but in importance. As the director of the FBI, Marcus was a symbol of justice and integrity, but he was also just Dad to Amelia, the man who indulged her endless questions about his work and encouraged her growing love for forensic science. Marcus and his wife, Naomi, a lawyer, had worked hard to ensure Amelia had a normal childhood despite the high stakes of their lives. That morning, Amelia had begged to visit the local bookstore on her own. "I'm old enough, Dad," she insisted over breakfast. "I know the way, and it's just a few blocks." Marcus hesitated. He was overprotective, aware of how the world often saw little girls like Amelia, no matter how brilliant or kind they were. But after some convincing, he relented. "Okay, but stay on the main roads. No shortcuts," he said, kissing her forehead before she dashed out the door. Amelia walked with purpose, a bright pink notebook tucked under her arm. Inside, she had jotted down questions for her next science project, along with doodles of fingerprints and magnifying glasses. Her imagination made every step an adventure. She was just a block from the bookstore when her curiosity got the better of her. Spotting a narrow alley, she decided to take a shortcut. It seemed harmless enough, just a way to get there faster. Halfway down the alley, Amelia noticed a small group of kids huddled around something on the ground. As she got closer, she saw it was a homemade drone. The kids, no older than 12, were laughing as they tried to fix a loose propeller. Amelia's face lit up. "Is that yours?" she asked, her voice full of excitement. The kids turned to her, surprised but friendly. "Yeah," one of them said. "It's kinda busted, though." Amelia knelt beside them, her notebook momentarily forgotten. She asked questions, fascinated by their ingenuity. From the street, Rick Callahan saw something entirely different. Driving slowly in his patrol car, he noticed the group in the alley. His pulse quickened, his mind already racing with assumptions. A cluster of black kids out of sight from the main road? To him, it could only mean trouble. He hit the brakes hard, the screech of his tires echoing through the narrow space. The kids looked up, startled, and instinctively scattered. But Amelia, too young and too trusting to recognize the danger, stayed frozen in place. Callahan was out of the car in seconds, one hand on his radio, the other on the grip of his gun. "Hands up," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Amelia's heart pounded as she slowly raised her hands. "I wasn't doing anything," she said, her voice shaking. Callahan ignored her words, his mind clouded with his own biases. To him, she wasn't a 10-year-old girl with a notebook full of dreams. She was a threat. "Turn around," he ordered. grabbing her wrist with unnecessary force. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around her small wrists, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't do anything," Amelia cried, her voice cracking. "My dad's Marcus Taylor. He's with the FBI." Callahan's lips curled into a smirk. "Sure he is, kid. You've got quite the imagination." Amelia tried to explain, but her words fell on deaf ears. Callahan wasn't interested in listening. To him, this was just another routine arrest, another problem solved. As he shoved her into the back seat of his patrol car, Amelia's notebook fell to the ground, the pink cover smeared with dirt. Callahan didn't notice it, or the storm of consequences about to descend on his life. The small interrogation room in the precinct was cold and stark, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. Amelia sat in the chair, her legs dangling above the floor. Her eyes, puffy from crying, darted nervously around the room. She had never felt this small, this powerless. Across the hall, Sergeant Callahan was typing up his report, oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed. In his mind, the arrest was routine. A black kid in a suspicious situation, resisting when approached. His report reflected the narrative he always fell back on, a carefully crafted justification for his overreach. He had no idea who Amelia really was, nor did he care. Callahan's partner, Officer Dana Ruiz, leaned against the doorframe of the bullpen. Dana, a younger officer with just 5 years on the force, watched Callahan's brisk typing with a furrowed brow. She had been in the car when it happened, but hadn't gotten out fast enough to intervene. "You sure about this one, Rick?" Dana asked cautiously. Callahan scoffed without looking up. What's to be sure about? She was where she shouldn't be, hanging out with a bunch of delinquents. "I stopped a situation before it could get worse." "She's a little girl," Dana said, her voice soft but firm. "And she kept saying her dad works for the FBI. Maybe we should check that out before—" Callahan interrupted with a dismissive wave of his hand. "They all say something when they're caught. It's just noise. Don't let them get in your head." Dana wanted to push back, but the unspoken hierarchy between them loomed large. Callahan was a veteran, and she was still carving her place on the force. Instead, she bit her tongue, her unease growing by the minute. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus Taylor was wrapping up a meeting in his office at FBI headquarters when his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize, likely a local call. Frowning, he answered. "Marcus Taylor speaking." The voice on the other end was strained and shaky. "Mr. Taylor, this is Officer Ruiz from the Atlanta Police Department. I think we may have made a mistake. And your daughter—" Marcus didn't let her finish. "Amelia?" he demanded, his voice sharp, the calm professionalism he was known for cracking in an instant. "Yes, sir. She's safe, but she's been detained," Dana said quickly. "Which precinct?" Marcus cut in. The cold fury in his voice sent a chill down Dana's spine. In less than 15 minutes, Marcus and Naomi Taylor stormed into the precinct. Marcus's tailored suit and commanding presence made every head in the station turn. Naomi, usually the voice of reason, was livid, her sharp eyes scanning for anyone who dared cross her. Behind the desk, the duty officer stammered as Marcus flashed his credentials. "Where is she?" he demanded. The sergeant on duty hesitated, then motioned toward the interrogation rooms. Marcus pushed past him without waiting for further explanation, Naomi right on his heels. Inside the interrogation room, Amelia's face lit up the moment she saw her parents. "Daddy, Mommy!" she cried, leaping from the chair. Marcus dropped to one knee to hug her tightly, his large frame wrapping protectively around her trembling body. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "We're here now." Naomi turned to the officer standing awkwardly near the doorway, her voice razor-sharp. "Who arrested her?" The officer looked down at his clipboard. "Sergeant Callahan, ma'am." Naomi's eyes burned with fury. "I want to speak to him now." Callahan was summoned to the front desk where he was greeted by Marcus Taylor's steely glare. For a moment, Callahan faltered, sensing he had walked into something far bigger than he could handle. But his bravado quickly kicked in. "What's this about?" Callahan asked, folding his arms. Marcus stepped forward, towering over the sergeant. "This is about the 10-year-old girl you handcuffed and detained without cause." "That girl," Marcus said, pointing toward the interrogation room, "is my daughter." Callahan blinked, his confidence slipping as the weight of Marcus's words hit him. He opened his mouth to respond, but Naomi cut him off. "You looked at her and saw a threat," Naomi said, her voice cold. You didn't see a child. You didn't see her humanity. You saw her skin and assumed the worst. Callahan tried to stammer out a defense. She was in an alley, and that's enough for you to treat her like a criminal? Marcus roared, his voice echoing through the station. The room fell silent. Officers glanced at each other, some shifting uncomfortably. Dana Ruiz stood to the side, watching as Callahan's self-assured demeanor crumbled. Before Callahan could say another word, Marcus leaned in closer. I'm going to ensure this precinct, this department, and this entire city understand the consequences of what you've done. You didn't just arrest my daughter. You arrested every ounce of faith this community has in law enforcement. Callahan's face turned pale as the gravity of his actions set in. For the first time, the invincible sergeant looked small. The story of Amelia's arrest spread like wildfire. Within hours, it was on every major news outlet and social media platform. Photos of Marcus Taylor storming into the precinct were plastered across headlines. Hashtags like Justice for Amelia and Naldo End Police Bias began trending, amplifying outrage and sparking nationwide conversations about systemic racism in law enforcement. For the Atlanta Police Department, the situation was spiraling out of control. Callahan's name was quickly leaked, and his past conduct came under scrutiny. Reporters unearthed a pattern of complaints against him, claims of racial profiling, excessive force, and harassment, all of which had been swept under the rug. The precinct, now under siege by media trucks and protesters, scrambled to control the narrative. Police Chief Margaret Hayes, a pragmatic but politically motivated leader, held an emergency press conference. We take these allegations very seriously, Hayes stated, her tone measured but impersonal. An internal investigation has been launched, and Sergeant Callahan has been placed on administrative leave pending its outcome. The announcement did little to calm the storm. Outside the station, hundreds of demonstrators gathered, their chants echoing through the city. No justice, no peace, they shouted, holding signs that read, "She's 10," and "Enough is enough." Meanwhile, inside the Taylor household, the atmosphere was equally charged. Marcus paced the living room, his phone glued to his ear as he coordinated with legal teams and activists. Naomi, seated at the dining table with her laptop open, was drafting a public statement. Amelia sat quietly on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out lion named Leo. "Why did he do it, Daddy?" she asked, her voice breaking the tense silence. Marcus stopped mid-step, his heart sinking. He sat beside her, taking her small hands in his. "Because some people see the color of your skin before they see who you are," he said gently. "And that's wrong. But we're going to make sure he and everyone like him learns that it's not okay." Amelia nodded, though her eyes were still clouded with confusion and hurt. "I didn't do anything bad," she whispered. "You didn't," Naomi said firmly, joining them. "This isn't your fault, sweetheart. It's his. And now, the world knows it." The next morning, Marcus and Naomi held their own press conference. Standing on the steps of City Hall, Marcus spoke with a fiery determination that left no room for ambiguity. "This isn't just about my daughter," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "This is about every child who's been treated like less because of the way they look. Every family that's been torn apart by the abuse of power. Amelia was lucky. She has parents who can fight for her. But what about the children who don't?" The crowd erupted into cheers of support. Marcus's words struck a chord, turning what had started as a local controversy into a national reckoning. Back at the precinct, the tension was palpable. Callahan, now the face of the department's failures, sat alone in an office scrolling through endless hate messages on his phone. His colleagues kept their distance, some out of fear, others out of quiet disapproval. Even Dana Ruiz, who had initially tried to defend him, avoided his gaze. "You brought this on yourself," she finally said during a rare exchange. "You could have handled it differently." Callahan bristled. "You don't get it, Ruiz. People like them don't respect authority. They push boundaries, and when we let up, we lose control." Dana shook her head, disgusted. "No, Rick, you don't get it. She's a 10-year-old girl, and you didn't see her as a child. You saw her as a threat because it was easier for you than seeing the truth." Her words cut deeper than Callahan wanted to admit, but instead of reflection, he doubled down, muttering something under his breath about political correctness ruining policing. As protests grew and public outrage intensified, an anonymous whistleblower within the department leaked body camera footage of the arrest. The video, showing Callahan's harsh treatment of a crying Amelia, confirmed the public's worst fears. The footage was clear. Amelia had been cooperative, polite, and terrified. Callahan's aggressive behavior was unjustifiable. The release of the footage was a tipping point. Calls for Callahan's termination and criminal charges grew louder. Sponsors and community leaders pulled their support from police initiatives. National leaders weighed in, with some demanding immediate reform, and others offering hollow platitudes. Within days, the FBI launched its own investigation, citing concerns about civil rights violations. The Department of Justice issued a statement condemning the actions seen in the footage, promising accountability. For Amelia, the fallout was a confusing mix of vindication and fear. Strangers sent her letters of encouragement, gifts, and messages of love. But there were also cruel comments, attempts to discredit her, and even veiled threats against her family. "Why do some people hate us so much?" she asked her parents one night. Marcus knelt beside her bed, his expression weary but determined. "Because they're afraid of what they don't understand," he said. "But change doesn't come easy, Amelia. It's hard, and it's slow, but it's worth it, and you're a part of that change." Amelia nodded, her young mind grasping only pieces of the bigger picture. But she clung to her father's words, hoping they were true. As the nation grappled with the implications of Amelia's story, one thing became clear. The fight for justice was far from over, but this time the world was watching. The impact of Amelia's arrest rippled far beyond her family. Across Atlanta, communities began organizing, turning outrage into action. Churches held forums on police reform. Local leaders pushed for changes to oversight policies, and schools initiated discussions about racial bias. Amelia's story became a symbol, sparking debates in living rooms, classrooms, and city council meetings alike. In one corner of the movement stood Reverend Clara Jenkins, a prominent voice in Atlanta's civil rights community. Reverend Jenkins had known Marcus Taylor from his early days as a local prosecutor. She reached out to him personally, offering her support and the strength of her congregation. "Marcus, I've seen too many of these stories," she said during a meeting at her church. "But your daughter's case, her face, it's waking people up in a way I haven't seen in years. We need to seize this moment." Marcus, who had spent his career trying to work within the system, was hesitant. "Clara, I want justice for my daughter, but I'm not sure I want her to become a symbol. She's 10. She didn't ask for any of this." Reverend Jenkins placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I understand that, but sometimes the world chooses us. And right now, Amelia is giving people hope. She's making them believe change is possible." Meanwhile, tensions within the Atlanta Police Department reached a boiling point. Younger officers like Dana Ruiz found themselves caught between loyalty to the badge and a growing awareness of the department's deep flaws. Dana, racked with guilt over her silence during Amelia's arrest, decided to speak out. At a community forum hosted by Reverend Jenkins, Dana shared her perspective. "I became a police officer to protect people," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "But that day I stood by while a little girl was treated like a criminal because of the color of her skin. I didn't stop it, and I should have. I'm sorry." Her admission was met with a mix of applause and skepticism. For some, it was a sign that change was possible. For others, it was too little, too late. But Dana's words set off a chain reaction, inspiring other officers to come forward with their own stories of witnessing misconduct and feeling powerless to intervene. Amid the growing unrest, Callahan's life began to unravel. Protesters gathered outside his home, chanting for accountability. His face was splashed across news broadcasts and social media, with headlines labeling him a racist and a symbol of everything wrong with modern policing. In private, Callahan fumed. He blamed everyone but himself, the media, his department, the Taylors. "I'm the scapegoat," he told his wife one night, pacing their living room. "I was doing my job and now they're throwing me to the wolves." But his wife, who had long grown weary of his anger and arrogance, wasn't convinced. "Rick," she said, her voice tired but firm, "maybe it's time to ask yourself why this keeps happening to you." Callahan dismissed her words, but they lingered in his mind, gnawing at his sense of righteousness. At the same time, Amelia's parents faced their own struggles. Naomi, who had always been fiercely private, felt exposed in ways she never expected. Strangers stopped her in grocery stores, offering condolences or asking probing questions. Marcus, despite his stoic demeanor, wrestled with guilt, wondering if he could have done more to shield his daughter from harm. Through it all, Amelia tried to make sense of the chaos. Her notebook, once filled with science experiments and doodles, now contained pages of questions about fairness, justice, and why people like Callahan acted the way they did. One night she asked Marcus, "Do you think he's sorry for what he did?" Marcus paused, considering his answer carefully. "I don't know, Amelia," he admitted. "Some people don't see the harm they cause until it's too late. Others never see it at all." "Will he ever say sorry to me?" she pressed. "I hope so," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. As the investigation into Callahan's actions continued, a new twist emerged. Documents surfaced showing that Callahan had falsified parts of his arrest report, claiming Amelia had been non-compliant and verbally aggressive. The evidence, including his own body camera footage, proved otherwise. The revelations were the final straw for Police Chief Hayes, who faced mounting pressure from activists, city officials, and her own officers. She announced that Callahan would be fired and referred his case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. While the news brought a measure of relief to the Taylor family, it didn't erase the trauma of what had happened. Naomi worried about how the experience would shape Amelia's view of the world. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, knew the fight wasn't over. "This isn't just about Callahan," he told Naomi late one night. "It's about fixing a system that let him get away with this for so long." As the city braced for what came next, Amelia's story continued to inspire action and reflection. But for the Taylors, it was a reminder of the fragile line between safety and vulnerability, a line they would never take for granted again. The weeks following Callahan's firing brought a mix of hope and uncertainty. While many celebrated the step toward accountability, others worried that it wasn't enough. For the Taylors, life had become a whirlwind of media appearances, legal proceedings, and community rallies. Amelia, though shielded from much of the chaos, was still processing the weight of her experience. One morning, Marcus received an unexpected call from Police Chief Hayes. The tone of her voice was a mix of professionalism and unease. "Director Taylor," she began, "I wanted to inform you personally. Sergeant Callahan has requested a meeting with your family. He claims he wants to apologize." Marcus's brow furrowed as he gripped the phone tighter. "Is this some kind of stunt to save face?" Hayes sighed. "I don't know, but legally he has the right to make the request. Whether you accept is entirely up to you." After discussing it with Naomi, Marcus decided to bring the matter to Amelia. "Sweetheart," he said, sitting beside her on the couch, "the man who arrested you says he wants to apologize. We don't have to see him if you don't want to." Amelia thought for a long moment, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "Will it make him stop hurting people?" Marcus hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't know, Amelia, but it might make him understand what he did to you." "Then I want to hear it," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, with legal representatives and a mediator present. Callahan arrived looking haggard, his usual bravado replaced by a visible discomfort. He sat across from the Taylors, his eyes darting nervously toward Amelia, who clutched her stuffed lion tightly. "Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, Amelia," he began, his voice strained. "I know I've done you all wrong. I handled the situation poorly, and for that, I'm sorry." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Poorly? You traumatized my daughter. You humiliated her, handcuffed her, treated her like a criminal. Poorly doesn't begin to cover it." Callahan looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I thought I was protecting the city, but I've made mistakes. I see that now." Amelia, who had been silent until then, spoke up. Her voice was small but steady. "Why did you think I was bad?" Callahan's eyes met hers, and for a moment he seemed at a loss. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I looked at you and I assumed. I shouldn't have." "That's not enough," Naomi said sharply. "You didn't just assume. You acted on it. You hurt a child because of your prejudice. Do you even understand the damage you've done?" Callahan nodded, his face etched with regret. "I can't take it back. I know that, but I want to do better. I need to do better." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Amelia stared at Callahan, her young mind trying to grasp the complexity of his words. Finally, she said, "You should stop thinking people are bad before you know them, And you should tell other police to stop too. Callahan nodded again, his expression unreadable. You're right, Amelia, I will. The meeting ended without fanfare, leaving the Taylors with mixed emotions. Marcus remained skeptical of Callahan's sincerity, but Naomi was struck by Amelia's courage. She shouldn't have to teach him how to be human, Naomi said later that evening. But she did. In the days that followed, Callahan disappeared from public view. However, news broke that he had voluntarily joined a training program focused on addressing implicit bias within law enforcement. While many dismissed it as a PR stunt, others saw it as a small but meaningful step toward change. For Amelia, the turning point was less about Callahan and more about reclaiming her sense of normalcy. She returned to school, resumed her science projects, and even began speaking at local events about fairness and kindness. Her bravery inspired other children to share their own stories, sparking a broader movement for accountability and reform. Meanwhile, Marcus and Naomi remained committed to their fight for systemic change. Marcus used his platform to push for new policies, including mandatory body camera use, de-escalation training, and civilian oversight committees. Naomi, ever the strategist, worked with grassroots organizations to amplify the voices of those most affected by police misconduct. As the weeks turned into months, Atlanta began to heal, though scars remained. The city's streets no longer buzzed with daily protests, but the lessons learned from Amelia's ordeal lingered in the minds of its residents. For Callahan, the turning point was a harsh but necessary reckoning. He would never return to active duty, but his story became a cautionary tale within the department, a reminder of the consequences of unchecked bias and abuse of power. For the Taylors, the turning point was a bittersweet reminder of their resilience. Though their lives had been upended, they emerged stronger, their bond as a family unshakable. And for Amelia, it was a step toward understanding the complexities of justice and humanity, a lesson no child should have to learn so young, but one she carried with grace and strength. The meeting with Callahan stirred a wave of reflection, not just for the Taylors, but for everyone connected to the incident. The apology, while far from enough to undo the damage, marked a moment of reckoning for the city. The fallout, however, continued to reshape lives, policies, and perceptions. In the weeks following the encounter, Amelia's story remained a catalyst for change. Civil rights groups and activists seized the momentum, using her case as a rallying cry for comprehensive police reform. Protests turned into policy discussions, and the once divided city began to unite around a shared goal, preventing this from ever happening again. For Amelia, life slowly began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be after becoming a national symbol. Her school rallied around her, hosting an assembly about fairness and empathy. Her classmates, some too young to fully understand the weight of what had happened, were kind in their own ways, offering her extra snacks at lunch or small notes of encouragement. Still, Amelia carried the invisible scars of her ordeal. Sometimes, she woke in the middle of the night, her heart racing as she relived the cold metal of the handcuffs and Callahan's harsh voice. Marcus and Naomi, attuned to her every emotion, made sure she had a therapist to help her process everything. During one session, Amelia voiced a question that had lingered in her mind. Why didn't anyone stop him? Her therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Yvonne, leaned forward. That's a hard question, Amelia. Sometimes people are afraid to speak up, even when they know something is wrong. But what happened to you is making more people brave. You've already changed more than you realize. For Marcus, the ordeal was both personal and professional. As FBI director, he was used to dealing with crises, but none had ever hit this close to home. His once impenetrable confidence had been shaken, replaced with a fierce resolve to make systemic changes. He testified before Congress, delivering a blistering critique of the gaps in police accountability and calling for nationwide reforms. I am not here as the director of the FBI, he said during the hearing. I am here as a father who almost lost his faith in the very institutions he has dedicated his life to. And I'm here to ensure no other parent has to feel the helplessness I did. Naomi, ever the strategist, shifted her focus to grassroots activism. She worked closely with local leaders, drafting proposals for independent review boards to oversee police misconduct cases. Her legal expertise became a powerful tool for community organizations, and her fiery speeches at rallies galvanized crowds. "Accountability starts with transparency," she often said, "and transparency starts with us demanding it." Atlanta was no stranger to racial tension, but Amelia's case struck a nerve that couldn't be ignored. The protests had forced local officials to confront uncomfortable truths, and the pressure for change was relentless. Under intense scrutiny, the Atlanta Police Department implemented sweeping reforms. A new community oversight board was established, granting civilians the power to review complaints and recommend disciplinary actions. Officers were required to undergo implicit bias training, and body camera usage became mandatory with strict penalties for non-compliance. Police Chief Hayes, initially resistant to the wave of criticism, publicly acknowledged the department's failures. "We cannot rebuild trust without admitting where we went wrong," she said during a press conference. Her leadership, while criticized by some as reactive, earned cautious praise for its willingness to embrace reform. At the same time, organizations like the NAACP and Black Lives Matter Atlanta kept the pressure on, ensuring the reforms weren't just performative gestures. Community forums were held to track the department's progress, and the voices of residents, especially those from historically marginalized neighborhoods, took center stage. Rick Callahan's fall from grace was as swift as it was public. His termination from the Atlanta Police Department was finalized after the internal investigation concluded, and the district attorney announced charges of falsifying a police report and violating Amelia's civil rights. Callahan's trial became a media spectacle, drawing national attention. While some portrayed him as a scapegoat, the majority saw him as a symbol of the systemic failures plaguing law enforcement. During the trial, prosecutors presented damning evidence, including Callahan's body camera footage and the falsified report. They also called on character witnesses who testified to Callahan's history of racially motivated actions. The defense, meanwhile, argued that Callahan had acted under stress and misjudged the situation, a claim that was met with widespread skepticism. Amelia's parents chose not to attend the trial, refusing to let their daughter's trauma be further exploited. However, Marcus issued a statement after the verdict was announced. Callahan was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. "This is not about vengeance," Marcus said. "This is about justice. It's about accountability and ensuring that the systems we trust to protect us are held to the highest standards." Amelia's story had a profound ripple effect, sparking similar investigations in cities across the country. Activists shared her story alongside others, demanding broader reforms and systemic accountability. Several states passed legislation requiring de-escalation training and creating independent bodies to oversee police misconduct investigations. At the federal level, Marcus leveraged his position to advocate for policy changes, including the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. While the legislation faced political hurdles, Amelia's case became a powerful example during debates, a human story that cut through partisan gridlock. As the months passed, Amelia began to heal. She found solace in her family, her friends, and her notebook, which once again became a place for science experiments and big questions. She even wrote a letter to Callahan, not to forgive him, but to tell him how his actions had changed her. "You made me scared of things I never thought about before," she wrote, "but you also made me stronger. I hope you think about that." The letter, shared later by Marcus during a public appearance, became a poignant reminder of Amelia's resilience. For Amelia, the experience would always be a part of her, but it didn't define her. Instead, it became the beginning of something bigger, a journey toward understanding, justice, and the power of her voice. As the dust settled and the world moved on to the next headline, the Taylors focused on rebuilding their sense of normalcy. Yet, the echoes of Amelia's experience continued to resonate, shaping the lives of those involved and the broader community. Amelia's days slowly returned to a semblance of childhood. Her mornings were filled with school, her evenings with science projects and books. But she wasn't the same little girl who had walked into that alley weeks ago. She had changed, and not all the changes were bad. One afternoon, her teacher assigned a project on leadership and asked each student to present someone they admired. When it was her turn, Amelia stood at the front of the class, clutching a small stack of index cards. "I was going to talk about my dad," she began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. but I think I want to talk about the people who helped me after what happened. She glanced at her teacher for reassurance before continuing. There were so many people who stood up for me, people I didn't even know, and it made me think, maybe I can be like them. Maybe I can help people too. Her presentation earned her a standing ovation from her classmates and a proud smile from her teacher. It was a small but meaningful step in reclaiming her confidence. At home, Amelia's curiosity began to expand beyond science. She started asking her parents questions about justice, fairness, and history. One day she found Marcus sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of reports. "Dad," she asked, "do you think things will really change?" Marcus looked at her, his expression softening. "Change is slow, Amelia, but every voice, every action makes a difference, and you've already made a difference." She nodded thoughtfully, filing his words away. Though she didn't fully understand the scope of her impact, she knew she wanted to keep making a difference, whether through her love of science or the lessons she had learned about standing up for what was right. For Marcus, the experience had transformed how he approached his role as FBI director. While he had always believed in the importance of justice, Amelia's ordeal made him acutely aware of how easily the system could fail those it was meant to protect. He pushed for reforms within the FBI, including increased community outreach programs and partnerships with local organizations to rebuild trust. He also launched a mentoring program aimed at fostering diversity within law enforcement, hoping to create a generation of officers more reflective of the communities they served. Naomi, meanwhile, became a sought-after voice in the fight for systemic change. Her speeches, marked by a blend of legal insight and raw emotion, inspired countless others to join the movement. But she also made a point to carve out time for her family, ensuring that Amelia's childhood wasn't overshadowed by their activism. "Balance is everything," Naomi often reminded Marcus. "We're fighting for a better future, but we can't forget to live in the present." In Atlanta, the reforms sparked by Amelia's case began to take root. The newly established Community Oversight Board held its first public meeting, drawing a large and diverse crowd. Reverend Clara Jenkins, who had become a guiding force in the movement, opened the meeting with a simple but powerful statement. "This is not the end, it's the beginning. And beginnings are hard, but they're worth it." The board's first actions included reviewing past cases of police misconduct and implementing recommendations for improved training protocols. While skepticism remained among some residents, the changes represented a tangible step toward rebuilding trust. Dana Ruiz, who had been one of the first officers to speak out, became a liaison between the department and the community. She led training sessions on bias and de-escalation techniques, using her experience as a cautionary tale. "I was silent when I should have spoken up," she told one class of recruits. "But silence is complicity. Don't make the same mistake I did." Amelia's story continued to inspire change far beyond Atlanta. Her name became synonymous with resilience and the fight for justice, mentioned alongside other pivotal moments in the ongoing struggle for equality. Several states adopted policies modeled after Atlanta's reforms, and advocacy groups used Amelia's case as a rallying cry for broader legislation. Though progress was slow, it was steady, and her story remained a powerful reminder of the stakes. Months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the Taylors visited a local park for a family picnic. It was a rare moment of peace amid the whirlwind of their lives. As Amelia played on the swings, Naomi turned to Marcus, her hand resting lightly on his. "Do you think she's okay?" Marcus watched their daughter, her laughter ringing out as she soared higher. "She's more than okay," he said. "She's stronger than we ever imagined." Naomi smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "She's going to change the world, isn't she?" "She already has," Marcus replied. The Taylor family's journey wasn't over, but they had found their footing again. Together, they faced the future with a renewed sense of purpose and hope, determined to leave the world better than they found it, for Amelia and for everyone who would come after her. The progress made in the wake of Amelia's ordeal was encouraging, but it wasn't without resistance. While many in Atlanta and across the nation embraced the push for reform, others pushed back. Law enforcement unions, conservative pundits, and certain political figures criticized the movement, claiming it unfairly vilified officers. Among the backlash was a particularly troubling development. An anonymous online group began spreading false information about Amelia and her family. Conspiracy theories painted Marcus and Naomi as opportunists, accusing them of fabricating the incident to promote a political agenda. Though baseless, the claims gained traction in certain circles, intensifying the threats against the Taylors. One evening, Marcus arrived home to find Naomi standing by the front window, her face tight with worry. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his briefcase down. Naomi handed him a printed email. "This came to my office today." Marcus read the message, his jaw clenching as he absorbed the venomous words. The email was filled with hateful language, accusing their family of destroying a good cop and threatening retaliation if they didn't back off. "This isn't the first one," Naomi admitted, her voice low. "I've been getting these for weeks." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to scare you or Amelia," she said, glancing toward their daughter's bedroom. Marcus's eyes darkened. "They want to scare us into silence. We can't let them win." The threats prompted Marcus to request increased security for his family, but the tension in their household was palpable. Amelia, though shielded from the specifics, sensed the unease. "Why are you and Mommy always whispering?" she asked one night as Marcus tucked her into bed. Marcus hesitated before answering. "We're just making sure everything is safe, sweetheart. You don't need to worry about it." Amelia frowned. "Is it because of what happened with the police?" Marcus sighed, stroking her braids. "Yes, but it's nothing we can't handle. You're safe, Amelia. I promise." As the tension mounted, a new twist in the story emerged. During the investigation into Callahan's conduct, another officer came forward with explosive information, a pattern of falsified reports and incidents of racial profiling linked to Callahan and a small group of officers. The whistleblower, Officer Jordan Matthews, revealed that Callahan and his associates often targeted black residents with baseless stops and arrests, manipulating evidence to cover their tracks. Matthews, who had grown disillusioned with the department, provided detailed records that corroborated his claims. The revelation sent shockwaves through the city. The misconduct wasn't just an isolated incident. It was systemic, implicating several high-ranking officials. Marcus, furious but unsurprised, doubled down on his calls for accountability. "This isn't about one bad officer," he told reporters. "This is about a culture that enables abuse and punishes those who speak out." The whistleblower's testimony also drew retaliation. Matthews received anonymous threats warning him to withdraw his statement, and his family was harassed. Fearing for his safety, he reached out to Marcus for advice. "I didn't sign up for this," Matthews confessed during a private meeting. "But I can't just walk away, not after what I've seen." Marcus respected Matthews' courage, but understood the danger he faced. "Standing up for what's right is never easy," Marcus said. "But your voice matters. It's how we start to change things." Despite the risks, Matthews refused to back down. His testimony became a critical part of a larger investigation into corruption within the Atlanta Police Department, leading to the suspension and eventual resignation of several senior officers. As the investigation unfolded, the Taylors prepared for one final public push to ensure lasting change. Reverend Clara Jenkins organized a massive rally in Atlanta's Centennial Park, drawing thousands of supporters from across the nation. The rally was both a celebration of progress and a call to action. Community leaders, activists, and even some police officers took the stage to share their stories. The event culminated with Amelia's appearance, a moment that had been kept secret to protect her from undue pressure. Dressed in a simple white dress, Amelia stepped onto the stage, holding Marcus's hand. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Amelia's focus was on the microphone in front of her. She glanced at her parents for reassurance before speaking. "I'm just a kid," she began, her voice steady. "I didn't know that something like this could happen to me, but it did, and it shouldn't happen to anyone else." The crowd fell silent, captivated by her words. "I want people to be kind and fair. I want police to protect people, not hurt them. And I want every kid to feel safe, no matter where they live or what they look like." Amelia's speech was met with thunderous applause, her words echoing through the park and across the nation. For many, it was a defining moment in the movement, a reminder of why the fight for justice was so important. The rally marked a turning point, but it also drew new threats. The Taylors knew the stakes were higher than ever, but they remained resolute. As the investigation into the Atlanta Police Department reached its final stages, the revelations became more damning. The question wasn't whether there would be change. It was how far it would go and who would be held accountable. The stage was set for a dramatic climax, with the Taylors, the whistleblowers, and the community bracing for what would come next. The night before the final findings of the investigation into the Atlanta Police Department were set to be released, the city buzzed with anticipation. The whistleblower's testimony, the community's relentless protests, and Amelia Taylor's story had all led to this pivotal moment. For Marcus Taylor, the stakes felt monumental. He had spent the evening poring over drafts of his upcoming statement, prepared to address the nation as both the FBI director and a father. Naomi, though outwardly composed, was equally tense. She worked late into the night coordinating with activists and legal teams to ensure the community would be ready to respond to the revelations. Meanwhile, Amelia sat in her room, her pink notebook open on her desk. She wasn't writing about science or mysteries this time. Instead, she doodled symbols of hope: trees, flowers, and a lion, her favorite animal. But elsewhere in the city, not everyone was waiting quietly. Around midnight, the Taylors' home security system triggered an alert. Marcus, jolted from his preparations, checked the system's camera feeds. A dark SUV idled suspiciously at the end of their driveway. "Naomi, take Amelia upstairs," Marcus said, his voice steady but urgent. Naomi grabbed Amelia, who was already half asleep, and ushered her upstairs. Marcus stayed near the front door, his phone in one hand and a firearm in the other. As the SUV's headlights dimmed, two figures emerged, their faces obscured by masks. The phone rang just as Marcus was about to call 911. It was Officer Dana Ruiz. "Director Taylor, I think you're in danger," Dana said, her voice breathless. "Callahan's associates. Some of them don't want this investigation to go public. I think they might—" Before she could finish, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. A brick had been thrown through the living room window, landing with a thud near the couch. Attached to it was a note: "Stay quiet or else." Marcus kept his composure, moving quickly to secure the house. Within minutes, police units and federal agents arrived, their flashing lights flooding the street. The SUV was gone, but the message was clear. Someone wanted the Taylors to back down. The next morning, the long-awaited report on the Atlanta Police Department was released. It detailed systemic abuses spanning decades, including falsified reports, racial profiling, and a troubling pattern of officers protecting one another from accountability. The findings were damning, implicating multiple officers, supervisors, and even city officials. The report concluded with sweeping recommendations for reform, including mandatory federal oversight of the department. Marcus Taylor delivered his statement with characteristic gravitas. Standing behind a podium in Washington, D.C., he addressed the nation. "This report confirms what too many have known for far too long, that our systems are broken and have failed the very people they are meant to protect. But today, we take the first step toward change. This is not the end of the fight for justice, it is only the beginning." His words were met with applause from supporters and scorn from detractors. Protests erupted across the country, some celebratory, others demanding even more accountability. Later that evening, the Taylors attended a community forum in Atlanta, organized by Reverend Clara Jenkins. The event was intended to discuss the report's findings and outline next steps for reform. The room was packed with residents, activists, and even a few police officers who supported the changes. As Marcus spoke about the importance of accountability, a commotion erupted near the back of the room. Rick Callahan had entered, flanked by two of his former colleagues. His presence was electric, sparking murmurs and tension among the crowd. "What are you doing here?" someone shouted. Callahan raised his hands, a surprising gesture of surrender. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice subdued. "I'm here to listen." Reverend Jenkins, ever the diplomat, allowed him to stay but warned, "This is a space for healing, not hostility. If you're here to contribute, you're welcome. If not, you can leave." Callahan took a seat at the edge of the room, his face unreadable. As the discussion continued, he remained silent, his presence a stark reminder of the harm caused by unchecked authority. Amelia, sitting between her parents, whispered, "Do you think he means it?" "I don't know," Marcus replied, his gaze fixed on Callahan. The night ended with a surprise announcement from Officer Dana Ruiz. Taking the stage, she revealed that she and several other officers had formed an alliance to push for internal reforms. "We know trust has been broken," Dana said, her voice resolute. but we also know it can be rebuilt, and we're committed to being part of that change." The crowd erupted into applause, and for the first time in weeks there was a palpable sense of hope. Amelia, watching the scene unfold, felt a weight lift from her small shoulders. She leaned over to her father and said, "Maybe things really can get better." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Maybe they can," he said, "and you helped make that happen." The events of the day marked a turning point, both for the Taylors and the city of Atlanta. The release of the report and the commitment from reform-minded officers sent a powerful message. Change was possible, but only through relentless effort and accountability. Amelia's story, once a symbol of injustice, had become a beacon of resilience and transformation. The following months brought significant change to Atlanta and beyond. The findings from the investigation sparked widespread reform, both locally and nationally. For the Taylors, life began to settle into a new rhythm, one shaped by a sense of purpose and hope for the future. The Atlanta Police Department underwent a historic overhaul. New leadership was appointed, with a focus on community policing and transparency. Policies aimed at rebuilding trust included independent review boards, mandatory implicit bias training, and de-escalation protocols. The whistleblower, Officer Jordan Matthews, became a prominent advocate for reform. Though he faced significant backlash, his bravery inspired others in law enforcement to speak out against systemic failures. Dana Ruiz, too, became a key figure in bridging the gap between the police and the community. She helped implement officer-led workshops in schools and neighborhoods, focusing on building relationships rather than enforcing authority. Nationally, the momentum from Amelia's case led to renewed pressure on lawmakers. Several states passed legislation aimed at reducing police misconduct, including stricter oversight and increased funding for community-based safety initiatives. Though Amelia returned to the routines of childhood, school, friends, and her endless curiosity, she was no longer the same girl who had walked into that alley months ago. Her experience had shaped her in profound ways, giving her a perspective far beyond her years. Her pink notebook, once a collection of doodles and science experiments, now included journal entries and reflections on fairness and justice. One entry read, "Sometimes bad things happen to teach people how to do better. I think that's what happened to me. I hope it doesn't happen to anyone else." Amelia's courage continued to inspire others. She was invited to speak at schools and community events, where she shared her story with honesty and grace. Though her parents shielded her from the limelight as much as possible, they couldn't deny the power of her words. "She reminds people what they're fighting for," Naomi said during an interview. "A world where every child can grow up without fear." One evening, the Taylors sat together on their back porch, enjoying a rare moment of calm. Amelia was curled up with a book, her laughter occasionally breaking the silence as she read aloud a funny passage. Naomi sipped her tea, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "It feels different now," she said, her voice soft. Marcus nodded, his arm draped around her shoulders. "It is different. Not perfect, but better. Do you think it'll last?" she asked. Marcus considered her question carefully. "That depends on us, on everyone. Change isn't permanent unless we keep working for it." Naomi smiled faintly. "You sound like Reverend Jenkins." "She's not wrong," Marcus said, glancing at Amelia. "And we owe it to her to keep fighting." Months after the climax of the investigation, the Taylors received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Rick Callahan. The letter was brief and handwritten, its tone uncharacteristically humble. "To the Taylors, I know I can't undo what I did to Amelia or to your family, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say it. Rick Callahan." Marcus read the letter aloud, his voice steady but thoughtful. Amelia, who had been sitting nearby, asked, "Do you think he means it this time?" Marcus folded the letter and set it down. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter if he does. What matters is what we do next." Amelia nodded, her young face filled with quiet determination. Amelia's story became part of a larger narrative, a moment in history that spurred change and inspired action. Though the world moved on to other battles, her impact remained. Communities across the nation continued to push for justice, inspired by the courage of a 10-year-old girl who refused to be silenced. For the Taylors, life carried on. They celebrated Amelia's achievements, supported her dreams, and found strength in one another. In the years to come, Amelia would look back on that summer as a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone she touched. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: their fight for justice had been worth it. Years later, a young woman stepped onto the stage at her college graduation. Dressed in a cap and gown, Amelia Taylor looked out at the crowd, her heart racing with excitement. "I've been told that one person can't change the world," she began, her voice steady. "But I've also learned that one person can inspire others to change it with them. And that's how change happens. One step, one voice, one action at a time." As the audience erupted into applause, Marcus and Naomi stood in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. Amelia had grown into the person they always knew she could be, a force for good, a beacon of hope and a reminder that even in the face of injustice, resilience could light the way forward. Amelia Taylor's story is a powerful reminder of the work we must do to create a just and equitable world. Her courage, standing up against injustice at such a young age, shows us that change begins with a single voice and grows when others join in. This is not just her story. It is a call for action from all of us. Her experience reveals the need to confront systemic biases, hold institutions accountable, and demand better from those entrusted with protecting our communities. It is a plea to break the silence and stand firm against injustice, no matter how daunting the challenge may seem. Each of us has a role to play in building a future where stories like Amelia's are no longer possible. We can start by educating ourselves about the issues, amplifying marginalized voices, and advocating for policies that promote accountability and equity. Small actions like having open conversations about bias or supporting local reform initiatives can make a profound difference. Her story also serves as a challenge to institutions to prioritize integrity, embrace transparency, and foster trust within the communities they serve. It's a reminder that real change requires not only words, but also sustained action. Let Amelia's bravery inspire you to act in your own way. Share her story to spark awareness, participate in discussions about equity and justice, and support organizations working to address systemic inequalities. Together, we can ensure that no child faces the kind of injustice Amelia endured. Change starts with us. One voice, one step, and one action at a time, we can move closer to a world where everyone is treated with dignity and fairness. Let's make it happen. For Amelia and for all those who deserve better.